everyone, and welcome to our meeting. I'm going to try what I tried last week on Wednesday's call of going through the process of setting up an analytics environment using a remote virtual machine. The primary reason for that is that my desktop is quite interesting. I have lots of stuff installed that I've installed over the days. So we'll go ahead and do that. The first process is to be using Anaconda. And so basically if you search for something like Anaconda Python, the biggest thing is you want to be able to get to anaconda.com. If you search for just Anaconda, you may find out about a maybe not so great movie. So once you get onto the website, the first thing to do is to find the products that you're interested in, and in particular you want the individual edition. And you want the open source version. You don't want to pay for something. There's no reason for that, not for what you're doing here. So then the next step is to go through and choose that you want to download it. Pick the appropriate installer for your operating system. You're probably running Windows and you probably want a 64-bit version. The reason being most modern computers are 64-bit. It's all about how much memory you can access. Generally speaking, you want to do the 64-bit. Now we're downloading the executable. Down here, once it's finished, you'll click on it to open it. Right now it's being scanned for a virus. And this allows us to open it up. One of the things you'll want to do as you're going through this process is take screenshots of everything. One thing I use is this snipping tool that's built into Windows. Probably not a bad idea to use. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is, as you're going through a process of doing installation, potentially do something like this and grab a screenshot as you go, and then save that off into Word. If you don't have Word, get Word, but you could use OpenOffice or something else. But the basic idea is to go through as you are doing this and paste it into the document. Sometimes you don't really have a chance to go back, so always a good idea to kind of save your work as you go. So definitely one of those tips I would recommend is using something like snipping tool to do your screenshots as you go. Once you see the setup, the first thing you're going to do is basically through, right? Not a whole lot of interesting stuff to do here. You're going to agree to the licensing agreement. Typically speaking, you can just do yourself. You don't necessarily have to have it for everyone. If you do for everyone, then it's going to require administrative privileges to do the installation. So you probably don't want to do that. And most of the time, it's just a single person using a computer anyway. If you do have a situation with multiple users, then you might want to do it for everyone. But that's kind of an unusual occurrence these days. You can pretty much accept the defaults as far as where it's going to install stuff. Don't add the path, your Anaconda 3 to the path. Generally speaking, it's not something you normally do. And you do want Anaconda 3 to be the default Python instance, especially since you're not installing a different version of Python. You wait around for it to do its installation. Doesn't take it very long. And so here we can see it's basically finishing up the installation. This part here is what takes the longest time of setting up the package cache. I think it's also potentially doing a snapshot through here of the operating system as well. So it does take a little bit of time, but beyond that, it doesn't take too long. While we're waiting for that, I'll go ahead and, did it just finish? No. Switch over to talk about R. There's two ways you can do it. One is to do it this way. You basically go to the R project and click on Download R. Pretty much pick a mirror. Doesn't really matter which one, but you probably want one close to you in the US. Again, truly doesn't matter too much. Then you want to download R for Windows, most likely, depending upon which version you're doing. And if you're installing it for the first time, you click on the Install R first time, and then you click on Download. Not quite as easy as perhaps whenever you're dealing with Anaconda, but it is one way. The next step is to then install RStudio. So again, Google R, or Bing in this case, RStudio. And there are two different things. RStudio is essentially kind of a wrapper, a UI on top of R. The R language itself is inside of this R that we just downloaded, R-4.0.5.win. So from here you look for R, click on products. Actually, you can click over to download. And then for this work, just as the other, you want to do the R desktop open source version. So you do want the essentially the community or the free version. You don't want to pay for anything, obviously. And in this case, you also go through and pick the operating system again that you're using, kind of a common trend. Go ahead and download RStudio. Hopefully by now, Anaconda has finished, and we'll see. Oh, it's still working on it. I should be able to go. I'm going to go ahead and installing R this way, just to see if we can keep things moving along. It may not let me because it may not like more than one install at the same time. Close that. And again, you do want to be taking screenshots as you're going through the process, and documenting the actual installation process. So at this point, it's kind of being a little cranky. Rather than making you wait, I'm going to pause the video for, oh, there we go. Actually, we're starting the process of doing R several times. Say OK. Accept the license for R. And accept the defaults. And this is installing the actual process or the tool that will take an R script, run it, and give back output. The R essentially execution environment is utilized by RStudio to actually do the work. RStudio itself doesn't really have any kind of means of doing it, so it lays on top of and utilizes the foundations that are provided to it by R executable itself, but you could theoretically run, close that out because I had clicked on it apparently 3 times. You could run R directly from a command line if you were so inclined. It's much easier to do so from inside of an executable such as RStudio. I'll go ahead and kick it off, even though the other one has finished, and it should be opening rather slowly here. There we go. And go through the process of installing RStudio. Similar thing, you basically just click next, obviously capturing screenshots as you go to show that you actually did the installation process. Once you've done so, make sure that you're capturing those screenshots and putting them inside of a document so that you can later do it. So the next part of this is to think about what's involved with the actual next steps, right? So the first thing that one generally does whenever they're learning a new environment is do something equivalent to Hello World, which is to basically say a very simple program that just shows that the environment is there and that it can test to make sure it's working, essentially a smoke test of the environment. So to go ahead and finish up Python here, or the RStudio, or I'm sorry, Anaconda, it offers you a link to go and install PyCharm. PyCharm is something that's a Python developer's toolkit, but unless you're writing a lot of code that is of a particular type of code, you probably don't need it. You can leave these checked. If you do, it's going to pop up a couple web pages for you that tell you how to get started with Anaconda. and a tutorial of sorts. So the useful, perhaps, especially as you're getting used to the material. And so you may want to take a look. But at this point, what we want to do is make sure, and I'm going to see if I can switch to a different network to hopefully increase the speed. Hopefully it'll bounce right back. Okay, and so this should, so the way to tell is open up your start menu and take a look at what your choices are here. We just installed Anaconda and RStudio both. So you can open up Anaconda inside of this, Anaconda 3, and you can see Anaconda Navigator, Jupyter notebooks, and then an Anaconda both PowerShell and command line prompt. Also Spider, which we don't really cover in the material we'll be talking about, but it is something that you may want to take a look at. Anaconda Navigator is a good place to start. Anaconda Navigator is basically a tool that makes it easy to manage your Anaconda environments. It simplifies a lot of the process, and so this is what it looks like. It makes it pretty simple to add things. One of the things that you can install is RStudio. So even though we installed it on the other side, you can click on install here and it'll install it for you. That it's considerably easier than installing it the way that I showed you. Either is appropriate. There is a few tricks if you do it this way, but it is something to consider. Another element and thing that you're probably going to want to use is going to be Jupyter Notebooks. If you're not familiar with notebook technology, it's time you learn, because it's really pretty cool. So this, whenever I launched it, I'm launching Jupyter, and it launches essentially into a web browser, an Explorer-like interface that lets you go through and do things like navigate into a particular folder. So in this case, I've went into Documents. Say I'm going to create a new folder, and I want to change its name because new folder is not a terribly useful one, and we'll call this Simple Notebooks. And then you change into that directory, and that's the pattern you'll see is you create something new. So if I create a Python file, it creates the Python file, giving it an untitled or a new item or some sort of placeholder name that you have to go change. And we'll change this to Hello World. And the point of any Hello World program is to just say hi, right? And what you did there is I hit the shift and enter to execute the line, and basically that's doing the equivalent of running the program, if you will. And that's one of the things that's nice about Jupyter Notebooks and notebook paradigms in general, is they allow you to interactively write code, test it, and essentially debug it in a very simple sort of way, broken down by typically small snippets or cells of information. Another thing that you can do is denote what the cell is, and in this case Markdown is something that's pretty useful. Markdown is a fairly advanced topic, but it is a way of simply kind of documenting and decorating your documents. And what this does is at the point that I evaluate it, it turns it into something that is prettier and easier to use. You can move these cells around by using these arrows, and there's also some key sequences that do that as well. And so that's basically the start of it. One of the things that you are asked to do is do some graphing. So you probably will want to do something if there's several ways to manage environments. I talk about this otherwise. You can do something like pip install at in a cell. And it'll actually do the installation process. This is one way to do it. You can also do something like conda install. And conda install is very much like pip install, except it's specific to the Anaconda distribution. And so both of those do the same basic thing, but they're also kind of the harder way of doing it. The easier way to do it is to go inside of your Anaconda Navigator, click into Environments, and look for whatever it is you're wanting to do. So typically switch this to all, say, and then I want to look for matplot. And you can see it is here and it is installed because it is version 3.3.4. One of the things that to do the R notebooks, because you'll notice that even though I installed R, you don't really see it, right? So it's still working through the installation process. But you can also do R inside of notebooks the same way. To do that, you create a new environment. So you click down here on Create. Whenever it comes back. The machine is not the biggest virtual machine that you could create, so I created something probably a tad small. But you basically create an environment, and then whenever you're going through that process, you have the choice of saying what kind of environment it is. The base environment is going to be just Python. You can create a new environment that is Python and R, and at the point that you go and create a new notebook, you'll have a different choice inside of your navigator that says new. Instead of just saying Python 3, will actually also say R notebook or R underneath there. So once this kind of wraps up whatever it is doing, am I doing something? Let's try this again. It's probably because I was still installing RStudio. So when we go to see Create and we want to say maybe Combined, check R, and you'll be able to then install or create R notebooks. Click on Create. One of the things, though, to keep in mind is that whenever you create this new environment, and an environment's basically nothing more than a folder on your hard drive, when it creates it, it doesn't have everything in it that is in potentially your previous environment, so your base environment. So you may end up having to install libraries inside of your newly created environment that were previously installed in your other environment. They're two different things. That's kind of the point of an environment, is to be able to separate out, to have different places to do your work that have different requirements of different potentially versions of libraries and so on. And at this point, it's actually going and getting all the stuff that's necessary to make the R notebooks be able to work. So that is one sort of way to go. Anaconda is probably the simplest way to go to do both R and RStudio and Python. Entirely up to you if you choose to go that route or not. Another way, the previously installed version of RStudio that I installed while we were waiting on this other stuff, you open it up, and basically it's a simpler sort of process in a way. Once it's there, it comes up, it says pretty much, do you want to be a good citizen of open source and share crash reports? Sure, why not, unless you're doing something that's potentially sensitive. And then you're into the R environment. To install packages here, you use the install packages underneath of tools. That's the typical way of doing things, and you search for the ones that you're interested in. And you can also so look for something you're interested in, so maybe graph or plot or matplot. Oh, that's not going to work. Sebring, isn't it? Anyway, lots of different libraries that you can search for. It's not as potentially robust of an environment as you might find in the Python world, but it is pretty adequate. So that's pretty much getting started with RStudio and Python. The key thing as far as the deliverables go is that you're asked to both create some graphs that have essentially a little bit more tweaking of them being done. That's one of the things you're asked to do, and you're asked to do that in both languages. The second part of that is to write some program, a simple program, but not as simple as hello world, or not as even as simple as converting from, say, Celsius to Fahrenheit or Fahrenheit to Celsius. So something a tad more complex than that. But it doesn't have to be something that's really, really complex. You may want to look ahead to the work you're going to do in subsequent assignments as a way of maybe shaping what it is you do that's a bit more advanced than the simple mathematical formula. So it's easy to argue that the assignment that you do in deliverable 2 is going to be more complex than the assignment you do in deliverable 1. So something to think about. With that, I've pretty much went through the process of setting up the environment. Let me know if you have questions. I noticed that a lot of you have not made progress. You don't want to get into a bad position by waiting too long on these assignments. Some of them take some effort, so do plan accordingly. And as always, if you have questions, reach out to me. That's what I'm here for, and I'll speak with you again on Wednesday.